Hello and welcome. My name is Biagio Mazza, Pastoral Associate at St. Sabina Parish in Belton, Missouri, and I'm here to welcome you to another Do You Know series question. As we continue our series on the history of the Mass, today's Do You Know question is, do you know how the Mass was impacted by the actions of the Roman Emperor Constantine? It's important to remember that in the first 300 years of the Church, the community was pretty much a very participative community. Whenever they gathered, everyone was involved in both its worship and its preparation and its community celebration. They were small communities. We're not talking about large numbers. And as a result, each one knew one another, understood the needs of one another, and prayed and supported one another. They usually met in small homes, and as their numbers grew a little bit, they saw the need to develop even what they would call small house churches. There were no structured building, but they met in homes and so on. They also saw the need to have someone in each community who would oversee the work of the community and call them and facilitate the preside over their gatherings. So they established a community in which there would be an overseer, which will be ultimately the ancestor of the bishop, and then the bishop had people that would help him, servants as they were known, who would be the ancestors of the deacons, who would take care of many of the administrative needs of the community, and ultimately the elders, who would be, in the future, would become the priests or the presbyters of the community. But these were originally called to consult the bishop on better ways of making decisions for the community. And so this became the structure pretty much by the year 250 or so. And it became a very common structure, a very efficient way to carry on the mission and ministry of Jesus. And yet the entire community was involved. It wasn't just dependent on the leadership. The entire community was involved and very much participative. In 312 to 313, significant changes occur with the Emperor Constantine. He made Christianity legal in the empire and also decided that he himself was going to become a Christian. And so as a result of that, he became very generous towards Christians, giving them many privileges and especially a lot of land, wealth, power, prestige, and esteem, and so on. This was very good for Christianity in terms of it spreading its message and being able to spread it throughout the empire, but it also brought with its own shadow sides, and these we will get to in a minute. Many, as a result of this kind of prestige and now the legalization of Christianity and the empire becoming Christians, many people started to join the church for mixed reasons and for mixed motives. But the bigger numbers, as we started together, it was very obvious that you needed bigger spaces to meet. And so one of the things that Constantine did is, in making some of the bishops Roman governors, he gave them also the basilicas, the law courts of their days, which were a huge building that had a platform and a throne at the end of the building, and in the front of the building, where Roman law was dispensed. A number of the bishops now started to use these buildings for the gathering of the community, the Christian community, to celebrate the liturgy. And so you had these large buildings removed from small house churches to these large buildings. And that created a major disruption in the participative nature of the community. It also the large numbers also required more administrative structure and leadership structure on the part of those in charge. And so what would happen now, the bishop, who was originally part of each community had a bishop, now the bishop became an administrator in charge of what the Romans had broken down their empire into dioceses. So he became a person in charge of a diocese, which was a large tract of the Roman Empire, and now he needed help. And so what he would do is he would send the elders to the rural areas to administer to the communities there where they could baptize and give Eucharist, whereas he would stay in the urban areas as primarily administrator, and no longer in many ways a servant to the people, but primarily caught in administrative duties and so on. This evidence of class structure begins to happen as a result, and that class structure is focused primarily around the structure of the ordained and the lay. And so you start to see evidence of this as it impacts the Mass tremendously, where we have various accounts of a more hierarchically structured liturgy or community gathering. I would like to read a passage to you of a typical account of a Mass that would have happened in an urban area, cities like Rome or Alexandria or Corinth, in roughly about the year 600. And this is how the description of that Mass would have occurred. On Sunday morning, the bishop rode on horseback from his residence to the basilica, accompanied by a solemn procession of the clergy who were to assist him. He dismounted and vested at the church door, and when he entered the church, a psalm was sung as the procession moved towards the sanctuary. He was greeted by a kiss of peace, and then he prostrated himself briefly before the altar. When he arose, a choir of monks sang first the penitential Lord have mercy, and then a hymn of glory to God, after which the bishop chanted an opening prayer. A subdeacon read the epistle, and the choir responded with a chanted prayer. Then a deacon read the gospel, accompanied by incense and 2 torches. Following the sermon, if there was one, a cloth was spread on the altar, while another psalm was sung, and the bishop received offerings from the nobles, while his assistants received those of the common people. The bishop then washed his hands and went to the altar where the communion loaves and the chalices were waiting. He and the other clergy gathered round the altar for the solemn Eucharistic prayer, and at the conclusion of which the archdeacon lifted the chalice while the doxology was chanted. After the recitation of the Lord's Prayer, the bishop gave the kiss of peace to his assistants, who in turn passed it to the remaining clergy and the people. Then he broke off the first piece of bread, and communion was distributed by rank, first to the clergy and then to the nobles and the other lay people. Communion was received standing, the bread being placed in the hand and the wine being sipped through a small tube. And again, all the while a song was sung. At the end there was a short prayer of thanksgiving and a dismissal of the congregation, followed by the final procession out of church. So, this kind of Mass and the celebration of this Mass set in motion a trajectory that would turn the Mass from a truly participative event, full conscious and active participation, to primarily an event that was being observed by the large part of the community, an event that was being celebrated up front, primarily dominated by clergy. These things we still struggle with today, but I hope that this has helped you to give you a better sense of how the Mass with the Roman Emperor Constantine really shifted in its focus away from full participation to a liturgy dominated primarily by clergy. And this will happen and will continue to happen through the centuries and will lead to all sorts of dissatisfaction on the part of the people when they could no longer participate. So I hope you will come back again to More Do You Know series question, where we will continue to explore the history of the Mass and how we got to where we are today. Thank you very much.